Hi, it's so good to see you again. How are you feeling today? Today, I want to tell you a story where even justice had to bow before a mother's strength. Imagine this the day after burying her son. Mrs. Evelyn Hart was standing in shock as her daughter-in-law Karina dragged her suitcase onto the porch, coldly saying, "You have 1 week to get out of this house." But Karina had no idea that the house hid a legal clause Mrs. Hart had written 15 years earlier, and that one detail would soon turn Karina's life into a nightmare she could never escape. From the Ring camera footage that revealed the truth to the blood-smeared red wall, born of her rage to the sealed court letter that flipped everything upside down, this isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a declaration of dignity and justice. Stay till the end because the ending is something you'll never forget. The morning after the funeral, when dew still clung to the front lawn, I hadn't even changed out of my black clothes when the sound of something clattering on the porch made my heart sink. I stepped outside and froze. Karina, my daughter-in-law, was dragging my brown leather suitcase across the porch, dropping it hard enough that the latch flew open and my clothes spilled onto the steps. Her face was colder than the November wind. Her voice didn't shake. "You have 1 week," she said flatly, as if announcing the lawn mowing schedule. "After that, I don't want to see you here." The words cut straight through me. Only yesterday I had buried my son Daniel, and now his widow was throwing me out of the house I had built brick by brick. Neighbors stood silently along the street. Mr. Monroe froze mid-watering, and Mrs. Gates lingered half and half, out of her doorway, eyes wide. No one spoke. They just watched as if I were some live show they couldn't look away from. Lily, my 14-year-old granddaughter, stood in the doorway, tears pooling. She started toward me, but Karina gripped her shoulder, yanked her inside, and slammed the door. The whole street went quiet. Only the thud of the suitcase on the wood floor and the flap of wings from startled birds filled the air. I stood there numb, clutching the freshly printed memorial photo of Daniel, his gentle smile frozen in ink, the smile of the only person who ever called me Mama Hart. I pulled my suitcase down the steps without looking back. It felt as if part of my heart had been ripped away with that door slam. Neighbors avoided my gaze as I rolled the suitcase down Maplewood Street. Someone whispered, "Poor woman kicked out right after the funeral." Yes, poor me, but no one knew I carried a secret that Karina would soon pay for. I reached Ruth Delgado's house, my friend of 30 years. Her little home at the end of the street smelled of toasted bread and coffee. She opened the door, saw the suitcase, her eyes wide. "Oh my God, Evelyn, she actually did it." I nodded, speechless. Ruth pulled me in hand on my shoulder. "Stay here. She thinks she can get rid of you." She hasn't seen the last of Evelyn Hart. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Karina's icy voice, Lily's tearful eyes, the suitcase on the porch, they kept replaying in my mind. I glanced around Ruth's small living room, the soft lamplight shining on the wooden box I always carried. Inside was a pressed maple leaf Daniel had given me as a boy. "Keep this, Mom. It's the prettiest leaf I've ever found." Now the leaf was old and brittle, but still perfectly shaped. I held it gently, feeling as if I were touching Daniel's childhood. I dug deeper, smudged birthday cards, an old wristwatch, a few college letters. Every item had its own voice whispering, "Don't let them erase you, Evelyn." Ruth knocked softly, bringing a cup of warm milk. "Drink this, maybe you'll sleep." I shook my head. She really wants me out of my own home. Ruth sighed. "Remember back in 2010, you told me you added a safety clause in the deed. I helped you write it." I stared at her. "You remember that, of course." I even kept a copy at the county office. You're not that easy to erase, Evelyn. Paper remembers. I stayed silent for a long time. Outside, the wind hissed through the window, but inside me a small flame flickered to life. Karina thought I was weak, a 72-year-old woman too broken to fight. But she forgot I've lived long enough to know every house has a soul, and it knows who truly belongs there. The next morning I brewed coffee and stood by the window. Neighbors looked down as they passed. No one dared meet my eyes. But I no longer felt ashamed. I felt angry and clear-headed. I knew Karina wasn't just kicking me out. She planned to sell the house, my house, Daniel's house, the one with his height marks on the kitchen door frame. I had to stop her, and I would. That afternoon, Ruth returned with the old file. Inside was the 2010 quitclaim deed, my name, Daniel's name, and Karina's. At the bottom, bold print made my hands tremble. Grantor retains life estate for the duration of her natural life. No sale or conveyance shall occur without written consent. Ruth smiled. See, you still live there in the eyes of the law? I traced the words with my finger. Daniel had said when signing, Mom, you'll always have a place here. Don't worry. That promise, even in death, still held legal power. Later, I walked outside. Kids played in the leaves. The air smelled of autumn. Behind me, Mr. Monroe called softly, Mrs. Hart. I'm sorry about yesterday. Everyone saw it. Karina went too far. Don't give up. That house, it's yours by right. I smiled faintly, saying nothing, but inside a voice echoed, yes, it will be mine again. That night I placed Daniel's old pocket watch on the table. Its ticking filled the room, every beat a reminder, you existed, and I'm still here. I picked up my phone and opened the doorbell camera footage Daniel had installed last year. I wanted to see Lily's face again, but the last clip made me gasp. Frame by frame, it showed Karina dragging the suitcase, throwing it down, then walking away. You could even hear the neighbors murmuring, and in the middle of it, Lily's trembling eyes fixed on me, full of silent pain. I closed the phone, my heart pounding. Evidence. Not just a legal clause, now I had proof on video, the truth speaking for itself. I shut my eyes, hearing the steady tick of the watch. In the dark, I saw Daniel's face, Lily's soft smile, and Karina's cold stare. The battle was only beginning. But this time, I wasn't the old woman thrown out onto the porch. I was the mother who would reclaim justice through the very house they tried to steal. If you've ever seen a mother pushed out of the place she called home, or if you simply feel for Evelyn Hart's pain and determination, then hit like and comment 1 to let me know you want to follow her journey. I promise it's one you won't be able to look away from. I sat still for a long time, staring at the faint light from Ruth's lamp, casting shadows on the wall. Outside drizzle tapped gently against the old window frame. I replayed the video once more, Karina's cold face, her voice saying, "You have 1 week." But this time I didn't tremble. I saw one thing clearly: my silence had been the ticket that allowed others to step on me. The next morning I put on the gray sweater Daniel once gave me. Every time I wore it, it felt like he was still here protecting me. Ruth brewed coffee while I sorted through my papers. The quitclaim deed sat on top. Beneath it were tax bills, property certificates, and faded receipts from the 80s. Ruth glanced at me. "What's your first move?" I answered slowly, "I need someone to confirm this clause is still valid. Not just as paper, but as the key to unlock my home again." She nodded. "I know someone. Elaine Porter works at the law office above the Maple and Rye Bakery. She specializes in old property claims, knows real estate law like the back of her hand." Hearing that name sparked something inside me, hope. I was tired of fear. Now I just needed one person to confirm I still had a right to stay. And if I did, I'd rise again. By noon, Ruth drove me there. Royal Oak's streets were calm, lined with golden leaves. Elaine's office was upstairs, the air rich with the scent of coffee and baked bread. My heart pounded as I entered. Elaine looked about 50, petite, but firm-voiced. I placed the stack of papers on her desk, my hands trembling. "I just need to know if I can go back to my home," I said hoarsely. She didn't answer right away. She flipped through each sheet carefully, her finger tracing every printed line. The room filled only with the rustle of paper and the ticking of a wall clock. I could barely breathe, afraid she'd tell me the clause was worthless, that I truly had nothing left. Then Elaine lifted her head, meeting my eyes, and said firmly, "This clause is fully enforceable. You still hold a life estate, the legal right to live there for the rest of your life. No one can sell, transfer, or evict you without your written consent." My heart thundered like a storm. The world spun for a second, then steadied. I clutched the table edge. "You're sure?" Elaine smiled. "Absolutely, and I advise you to immediately file a lice pendens. It'll mark the property as under dispute. If your daughter-in-law tries to sell it, any buyer or bank will see it and stop the process right away." She pulled out a blank sheet, neatly writing "lis pendens" at the top. "We'll need to attach a certified copy of the deed, your sworn statement about the eviction, and I'll notarize everything before we file it with the Register of Deeds." I nodded, warmth returning to my chest. Ruth smiled broadly, and tears welled in my eyes. For weeks, I'd lived in the shadow of fear. Now, for the first time, a spark of justice glowed. Elaine guided me through each line, explaining carefully. She added that once the file was recorded, any investor, agent, or lender checking the property would see the red mark and steer clear. "You won't be forced out again," she said. "The law is on your side." I gripped the pen, my hand shaking slightly, and signed. The notary seal clicked down with a sharp thump that to me sounded louder than church bells. Ruth chuckled. "Paper doesn't lie, Evelyn." I whispered back, "No, but it remembers who tells the truth." That afternoon, we submitted the papers at the county office. The clerk stamped, "Received 3 times." Holding the documents with their case number, I felt lighter, as if I'd just reclaimed a stolen piece of my soul. On the drive home, Ruth asked, "Do you think Karina will stay quiet now?" I looked out the window at my reflection. No, but this time, I have something she can't destroy, the truth sealed in ink. That night when Ruth was asleep, I sat by the window watching the rain shimmer under the streetlight. My phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. "You should watch your back." Laws mean nothing when no one's on your side. I stared at it, unafraid. I knew exactly who sent it. Instead of deleting it, I took a screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. This time, I wasn't hiding. The next morning, Ruth called out, "Evelyn, someone's at the door." My chest tightened as I stepped out. Karina stood there, designer coat, flawless makeup, fury in her eyes. Beside her was Paula, my daughter, looking torn and uneasy. Karina spoke first. "I came to settle this. You're making everything a mess. The sale's frozen. You're ruining our lives." I stayed calm, standing tall. "No, Karina. I'm just protecting my own life." Paula cut in gently. "Mom, maybe we should just let it go. I know Karina went too far, but if you keep pushing this, people in the neighborhood will talk. I don't want Lily to get dragged into—" I turned to her, my voice firm. "Paula, if I stay silent today, tomorrow, someone will teach you that dignity has a price tag. Do you really want to learn that lesson?" Karina's hand clenched around her purse. Her eyes flared. "You stubborn old woman, you think that dusty piece of paper will save you?" I replied softly. "No. The law will, and the truth will bury your lies." The air thickened. Paula looked down, unable to speak. Finally, Karina scoffed, turned on her heel, and hissed, "We'll see who wins." When their car pulled away, Ruth stepped out smirking. She just confessed in front of witnesses. I exhaled deeply, steady and unafraid. For the first time, I felt completely calm. That night, I opened my laptop. Ruth had saved the Ring camera video to a hard drive, along with photos of the suitcase and the deed. I stored them all in a folder labeled Hart-Tall Evidence. Under the warm lamp glow, the file grew thicker, every piece of proof, every scar, every humiliation, now turning into power. Before bed, I stood before the mirror looking at the silver-haired woman staring back, tired eyes, but brighter than ever. I whispered, "Evelyn, Hart hasn't vanished. She's just begun." Outside, the wind rattled the maple branches, leaves brushing the window. I closed my eyes, listening to the old clock ticking steadily, the rhythm of my son's heartbeat, the rhythm of justice returning. If you believe I, Evelyn Hart, am right to stand against injustice and refuse silence, leave a comment saying, "You agree, so I'll know you're on my side." But if you think I should let go and surrender for peace, comment to disagree, tell me your view. Because in this story, everyone must choose a side. I sat quietly in front of my computer, the cold blue light reflecting off an old woman's face in the stillness of night. The folder, Hart Evidence, was neatly arranged on the screen, videos, photos, notarized copies, even the anonymous messages I'd captured. Each file was a fragment of truth. I clicked gently on the video icon, Karina throwing my suitcase down the steps, yanking Lily's arm back, neighbors murmuring, and me standing there like a shadow. I closed my eyes and drew in a slow breath. Every time I rewatched it, the anger inside me took clearer shape. Not explosive, not wild, but cold, steady, and sharp as steel. I opened the drawer and pulled out the lease pendants Elaine had given me. The faint red seal in the corner read, "Recorded, Oakland County Register of Deeds." 4 small words, yet they'd stolen Karina's sleep. Ruth told me earlier that Karina had already called several real estate offices, but they all refused to handle the sale. The property was officially marked in dispute. Karina must have been losing her mind. And when people like her get angry, they make mistakes. The next morning, Ruth drove me to the market. On our way back, we passed my old house. Karina's car was in the driveway beside a shiny black SUV. A tall man in a wool coat stepped out holding a stack of papers. Brock Tanner, a real estate broker, and next to him stood Grant Miles, a name Ruth recognized. "He's a house flipper," she whispered. "Got sued once for trying to buy disputed property." I ducked behind a maple tree and peered through the fence. Karina was smiling, chatting with Grant, then inviting them inside. I couldn't hear the words, but her eyes gleamed as if she were showing off a prize. That house where Daniel once played guitar, where Lily took her first steps, was now being flaunted like a bargain sale. I clenched my purse. Ruth touched my arm. "Don't react. Let them go. The law's on your side." I nodded, though my pulse raced. The law could protect property, but dignity was something else. And I refused to watch strangers trample over my memories. Back home, I told Elaine everything over the phone. She paused, then said, "They might try a pocket listing, a private sale off the record. But as long as the Ellis pendant shows in the system, no bank will touch it. Stay calm. If they push it, we'll have even stronger proof." I thanked her and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing strangers walking through my rooms, Touching the walls, I painted myself flipping through Daniel's photos. Each image stabbed deeper. The next morning, Ruth woke me with a message from a neighbor. Karina's taking photos of the house someone's filming. Looks like a property ad. I threw on my coat and ran outside. When I arrived, Grant and Brock were by the gate, camera in hand. Karina stood beside them, voice syrupy sweet. This home has such beautiful history, perfect for young families. Across the street, I stood watching, unblinking. She didn't see me, or maybe she pretended not to. I took out my phone and snapped photos, every face, every detail. Ruth whispered, "They're filming your evidence for you." That afternoon, Elaine called again. "Good news," she said. "Your filing's now in the registry." Grant Miles contacted a title company. They saw the Elias pendants and immediately declined. The deal's been stopped. I froze, then smiled. I had never heard 3 words sound so beautiful. Stopped immediately. That evening, Ruth and I sat on the couch with cups of ginger tea. "I bet Karina's smashing things right now," Ruth joked. I looked outside at the darkened street. "She'll do worse. But this time, I'm ready." And she was right. 3 days later, Karina snapped. Late afternoon, tires screeched outside. When I opened the door, she was there, face-flushed, phone clutched tight. "What did you do? Why is the title frozen? Why did the bank back out?" she screamed. I met her gaze, calm and firm. "Because you're not the sole owner. I'm still alive, and the law is still alive with me. You're ruining Lily's future, no, Karina." "You are." She yelled a few more words before storming off. But I'd seen it, that flicker of fear in her eyes. And once fear appears, truth has already won halfway. That night, I opened the Ring camera footage again, zooming in on Lily's face the moment before Karina pulled her inside. Pain, fear, and something else. Faith that I'd come back. I whispered, "I will, Lily. I promise." 2 days later, Ruth brought news from a friend at the county office. Grant Miles backed out. Karina fought with her broker. She's been reported to the HOA for trying to sell a disputed property. I smiled. Sometimes karma doesn't need a push. It just knows where to go. That night I sat on Ruth's porch watching the warm streetlights glow. Winter was coming, but I no longer felt cold. I opened my notebook and wrote, "The strong don't always win, the steadfast do." I don't need to shout. I just have to stand still because the truth speaks on its own. When I closed the book, my phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "The game isn't over, old woman." I chuckled and typed back, "I'm not playing. I'm reclaiming what's mine." Ruth peeked out. "Aren't you scared?" I shook my head. "No. I buried my son. What could possibly scare me more than that?" That night, I watched the reflection of the streetlights on the glass, listening to the wind brush through the maple trees. I knew the real confrontation was coming, but this time I wouldn't face it alone. I had Ruth, the friend who never left, even when I almost gave up. I had Elaine, the woman who turned paper into armor. And I had Lily, the granddaughter, whose eyes carried the promise that justice would be seen. I closed my eyes and smiled faintly. The battle wasn't over, but I had already won what mattered most. I had found myself again. If you believe that it's never too late to stand up and that sometimes justice wears a mother's face, then hit subscribe to walk this journey with me. Every click, every comment is your way of saying, you believe in Evelyn Hart, the woman who turned grief into strength and dared to reclaim everything with her own hands. I woke in the middle of the night, the moonlight spilling through the curtains in pale streaks across the wall. In the stillness, I heard the wind weaving through the trees and Daniel's old clock ticking steadily in the corner. That sound had never stopped a quiet reminder that some things, no matter how often they're taken, can never be silenced. I smiled faintly. If Karina thought she could break me, she'd underestimated the wrong woman. The next morning, Ruth called me out to the porch. She held the local paper, brow furrowed. "Evelyn, look at this." On the real estate page was an unlisted ad, charming Maplewood home. Peaceful location. Owner must sell fast. No name, just a strange email, but the address matched perfectly. I didn't need to think twice. Karina was trying to sneak around the law, selling the house through back channels under a fake identity. Ruth gritted her teeth. She still doesn't quit. Someone needs to teach her what real law means, I said quietly. She can erase her name from a post, but she can't erase the seal from the county record. Paper speaks louder than her lies. At noon, I called Elaine. Her voice was calm as ever. Just as I suspected. They're attempting an off-market sale. But don't worry, once a L.I.'s pendants is recorded, any transaction dies the moment legal checks begin. You just need to stay calm and observe. She told me to note every car, every visitor, every movement around the house. I followed her advice. I kept my phone ready in my coat pocket, a small weapon but sharp. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled up again. 2 men in suits got out to meet Karina. One of them I recognized, Grant Miles, the same investor who'd been rejected earlier for trying to buy a clouded title. He was back now with a lawyer at his side. I hid behind Ruth's fence and filmed everything. They stood on the porch for nearly 20 minutes. The wind blew papers from Karina's hand. She shouted in frustration, slamming the folder onto the steps. Grant turned cold and walked away. When his car drove off, Karina hit the porch column so hard, I saw her knuckles whiten. I didn't feel triumphant, only pity. Her pride was cracking piece by piece. But I knew people like Karina never surrender quietly. When they lose to the law, they turn to destruction. 3 days later, Ruth called at noon. "Evelyn, someone saw Karina bringing paint into the house." My chest tightened. We rushed over. The front door was wide open, the stench of paint thick in the air. I froze. The living room walls were slashed with deep red paint curtains, torn mirrors shattered. Karina stood in the middle paint roller in hand, streaking angry lines across the wall. "Karina!" "What are you doing?" I shouted. She turned, smirking. "This house is mine. You have no right to be here." I raised my phone recording. Lucky for me, I have every right to document someone vandalizing disputed property. Her expression faltered. Then she sneered. "You think that camera will save you? No one believes a trembling old woman." Before I could answer, the door upstairs creaked. Both of us froze. Lily stood on the stairs, pale eyes glistening. She looked around in disbelief. "Mom." "What are you doing?" Karina stammered. "I'm just cleaning up." "Cleaning?" Lily's voice cracked. "By destroying everything? This is Dad's house. How could you?" The room went silent. A tear slid down Lily's cheek, splashing onto the paint-streaked floor. She bent to pick up a broken photo frame, Daniel holding her as a baby. "Do you remember what Dad said?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "He said this house keeps our memories, no one's allowed to hurt it." Lily looked up, her eyes fierce. "Then I won't let anyone hurt it anymore." Karina screamed. "Lily, you don't understand adult matters. Get out." But this time the girl didn't move. She ran to me, wrapping her arms around me. "I don't want her to do this anymore," she cried. "Grandma, don't leave." In that moment, I knew the battle had turned. It wasn't about law or papers anymore. It was truth laid bare in a child's eyes. Karina dropped the roller, voice breaking. "Fine, stay here and rot." She stormed out, the sound of her car tearing down the street echoing into silence. Ruth rushed in, phone in hand, breathless. I got it all on video. She just destroyed the place in front of her daughter. I sank into a chair, holding Lily close. The girl trembled, whispering, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I was scared Mom hated you." I stroked her hair. "No, sweetheart. Your mom doesn't hate me. She just doesn't yet fear what's right." That night, Ruth helped me save every video, every photo, the paint, the glass, the damage. I sent the files to Elaine. Her reply was short but powerful. "Keep everything. This is the proof we need. You've just won again." I sat beside Lily as she slept, listening to her soft breathing. Outside, the streetlights shimmered through the window like mist. "See, Lily," I whispered. "Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from the heart." The next morning, Ruth got a call from the neighborhood association. The HOA had received official vandalism reports with photos attached. They were issuing a formal penalty notice to Karina for property damage and disturbance. When I heard, I didn't feel joy, just relief. Finally, Karina would face the community she once looked down on. That afternoon, I stood before the house. The red paint had dried into dark streaks like clotted blood. I placed my hand on the wall and murmured, "Don't worry, my dear house. We'll make you whole again." Ruth joined me, resting her hand on my shoulder. "You've already won on another level, Evelyn, not just by law, but in hearts." I smiled softly. In my mind, I heard Daniel's voice. "Mom, don't be afraid of what's right." I turned to Ruth. "It's time to do the last right thing. I'm bringing Lily home so she knows what a real home feels like." Ruth nodded. "And I'll be here like always. If you've watched this far and believe that truth always protects itself, leave or comment, 'I believe in justice' below, so I'll know there are still hearts out there, standing with Evelyn Hart, hearts that understand that sometimes steadfastness is the most noble form of revenge." I stood before the house, the paint now dry, the dark red streaks fading into the color of old scars. Ruth stood beside me, silent. We had just heard the news Karina had been gone for 3 days, no one knew where. Neighbors said they saw her leave in a car with Grant Miles, the same real estate investor tied to that off-market scheme. When I heard it, I just smiled faintly. A person who's lost faith can do anything, and Karina had reached that point. That afternoon, Ruth went to buy new paint while I sat in the garden watching the last sunlight slip across the porch. The smell of damp earth and geraniums filled the air, pulling me back to Daniel's laughter. He planted those flowers himself, saying, "When they bloom, this porch will glow red like summer saying hello." Now the flowers still bloomed. Only their gardener was gone. Gravel crunched under someone's shoes. I turned and saw Paula, my daughter, standing at the gate with a paper bag of food. "I heard about what happened," she said softly. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Better than you think." She glanced around the house, guilt flickering in her eyes. "Karina's completely lost it. I tried to talk to her, but she keeps saying you're the one ruining everything. Mom, are you going to press charges?" I looked out at the garden. "No, I don't need to. The court's right here." I pressed a hand to my chest. Inside me, justice has already been served. Paula said nothing. Maybe she didn't understand, but she would someday. Some lessons take time to sink in. That evening, Ruth and I painted the walls anew. While wiping off the last streaks of red, we heard a car stop outside. Ruth peeked through the window. "It's Grant Miles." I wiped my hands and stepped out. Grant leaned against his car, calculating as always. "Mrs. Hart." He began smoothly. "I came to discuss the property." Karina says I can buy it if you agree to withdraw the dispute. I smiled lightly. Interesting. Did she also tell you that any transaction made under dispute can be nullified? He froze for a second, then straightened. We can negotiate. You can stay here for life. I just take ownership rights. You live, I profit. I stepped closer, meeting his eyes. You know I used to think only family could hurt me. Now I see greed spares no one. I won't sell, won't sign, and won't trade justice for money. Leave. Grant glared. You'll regret being stubborn. I smiled back. Maybe. But at least I'll regret it inside my own home, not on the street. He drove off, tires grinding over gravel. Ruth chuckled. You just made a wolf tuck its tail. I exhaled. No, I just stood still and the law did the rest. A few days later, the HOA's penalty letter reached Karina. The mail carrier said she'd torn it to shreds right in front of everyone. The gossip spread fast. Mrs. Hart's daughter-in-law's lost her mind. I stayed quiet. The cruelest punishment for the arrogant isn't anger, it's being seen clearly by those who once respected them. That night, I sat alone on the porch and played an old voice message from Daniel's phone. Mom, if I'm not around anymore, promise me you'll keep living. I know you're strong. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. His warm voice filled the air and tears slid down my cheeks. I did it, son, I whispered. Your mom kept her promise. The next morning, an email from Elaine arrived. Attached was a new legal report. Liz Pendens remains active. Grant Miles has withdrawn from the Maplewood market. Karina appears to be in debt. Her condo is under bank review for repossession. I read every word feeling a weight lift. Not joy, just the peace of knowing everything had finally fallen into its rightful place. That afternoon, Lily came by with a small box of cookies, the scent of butter filling the air. Grandma, can I help paint the door? She asked. Of course, I smiled, ruffling her hair. This door used to be locked. Now we paint it new so next time it opens only light will come through. She grinned a real fearless smile at last. As we painted, Ruth ran over with a letter. Evelyn from the courthouse. I unfolded it slowly. Mrs. Evelyn Hart is hereby granted lifetime residency at 17 Maplewood. Any transaction involving this property is void without her signed consent. My hands trembled as I set the letter down. It's over, Ruth. Finally, over. Ruth hugged me, tears glinting in her eyes. Justice came late, but it came beautifully. That night, Lily sat beside me, drawing on a sheet of paper. In uneven letters, she wrote, "The house of Grandma Evelyn and Lily." I looked at those words and felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. Outside, the geraniums flamed red under the sunset, and the newly painted wall gleamed soft and clean. I closed my eyes, breathing deep, almost hearing Daniel's presence in the breeze, gentle, forgiving, forever a part of this home. If you've listened this far, leave A in the comments, a small gift for all the mothers who've been hurt, yet still chose to rise with kindness. Because sometimes, even a single rose can be the comfort that heals a heart that has weathered every storm. I sat beside Lily as she carefully glued tiny paper flowers onto the sign that read, "The House of Grandma Evelyn and Lily." She giggled, her eyes sparkling as the late afternoon light streamed through the window, catching the soft brown of her hair. For the first time in months, I felt a kind of peace I'd longed for. The house finally felt as it once had, warm, full of laughter, free from shouting and bitterness. I thought maybe I could finally breathe again. But Ruth came in holding her phone, worry written all over her face. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "there's a problem. Karina, she's coming back." I frowned. "What do you mean the bank already repossessed her condo?" Ruth nodded. Exactly. And that's why she's furious. I just heard she went to her lawyer. She's planning to sue you, claiming you forged the signature on the old deed. I gave a small, calm smile. Forgery, that paper was notarized, Daniel's own signature, the county seal, all of it. She's only making a fool of herself. Ruth sighed. I know, but desperate people are dangerous. That evening, Elaine called. Her voice was firm. Don't worry, I reviewed everything. She doesn't have a case, but please secure your property change. The locks add cameras. She might try to show up. I thanked her and Ruth, and I got to work that night. Lily helped moving boxes and asking Grandma, why do adults fight over houses like this? Aren't houses just for living in? I paused and smiled sadly. Some people forget that the most valuable thing isn't the walls, it's the love inside them. But remember, sweetheart, if someone tries to take what's yours, protect it with kindness and courage. Lily nodded, far wiser than her years. 2 days later, the moment I dreaded arrived. Rain poured hard, the roof echoing with each drop, when sudden pounding shook the door. I opened it, and there stood Karina. Soaked hair plastered to her face, her eyes blazing with fury. Happy now, she screamed. You took everything from me, the house, my name, my money. What more do you want? I stepped back, but my voice stayed steady. I never wanted you to lose anything. I just wanted to keep what was rightfully mine. Rightfully, she spat. You're just an old woman clinging to the past. I looked into her eyes. Maybe, but my past was built on love. Yours is built on lies. You choose which path to walk, just don't drag me down with you. Karina laughed bitterly, her voice breaking. Daniel said I was everything to him. You hated me for that. I shook my head softly. No, Karina. I never hated you. I only pitied him because he loved someone who didn't know how to love anyone else. She went silent, then suddenly began to cry. Rain hammered harder. Through the storm, her rage melted into exhaustion. Maybe for the first time she saw herself clearly. Do you think I deserve this? She whispered. I think we all pay for our choices, I said gently. But paying doesn't mean you can't be forgiven. The question is whether you're brave enough to face what you've done. Karina lowered her head, turned, and walked away into the rain. I stood there listening as her footsteps faded. A part of me felt lighter. Another part hurt, because no matter what, she was still my daughter-in-law, still the woman Daniel once loved. The next morning, I told Elaine. She was thoughtful. Maybe she's starting to understand, Elaine said. Sometimes people have to lose everything to see what was truly worth keeping. That afternoon, Ruth and I decided to restore the house completely. We repainted the walls, rehung the family photos, and replaced the curtains with white ones that caught the light. When I put Daniel's old clock back up, Lily clapped. Grandma, it's ticking again, I smiled. Yes, sweetheart, the house is alive again. That evening, Lily did her homework while I sat on the porch with tea. On the table lay a beige envelope, a copy of the canceled sale agreement, and a handwritten note from Elaine. Congratulations, Mrs. Hart. Your case will be used in a legal seminar on life estate rights. You've won not just by law, but by grace. I read it over and over, tears falling, but this time they weren't bitter. I no longer had to prove anything to anyone. Later, I went out to the garden and lit the old lantern Daniel once fixed. Its golden glow reflected off the rain-wet leaves. Ruth was planting geraniums again, and Lily was pressing the sign, the house of Grandma Evelyn and Lily, into the soft soil by the porch. I whispered, Daniel, can you see this? There's laughter in our house again. A breeze stirred the flowers, trembled, and in that moment it felt like he answered. The next morning, something unexpected happened. When I opened the door, a white envelope sat on the steps, no name on it. Inside was a check for $15,000 and a short note. "Thank you for teaching me what honor means. Use this to repair the house." See. I gripped the paper, my eyes misting over. Maybe at last Karina understood that losing in court doesn't mean losing your dignity unless you throw it away yourself. That night, Ruth put on soft music while I reread my old journal. At the end, I added one last line. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it lightens the present. And sometimes the enemy we once feared becomes the mirror that helps us find ourselves again. If you've ever been betrayed, yet chose to rise with calm and compassion, leave a comment that says, "I understand, Evelyn." Just 4 words, but enough to remind me that out there are still hearts as strong as mine hearts that believe kindness is the final victory. I looked at the words "I understand, Evelyn" printed by Ruth from the viewer comments. Dozens of messages filled the page from mothers, wives, grandmothers, women who had once been pushed out of the very homes they built, who had fought to be respected again. I read each line slowly, warmth rising in my chest. So my story wasn't just mine. Somehow everyone out there was fighting their own quiet battles alongside me. That morning, sunlight streamed through the newly painted window, glowing across the kitchen table where Lily was doing homework. She looked up, smiling. "Grandma, I got picked to give a speech at school today. The topic is, the person who inspires me most." I grinned. "And who's that going to be?" Lily tilted her head, eyes sparkling. "You." The words caught me off guard. My chest tightened. I only managed to stroke her hair and whisper, "Just speak from your heart, dear. Don't exaggerate for Grandma's sake." Lily shook her head. "No, Grandma. You taught me that real strength doesn't have to shout. It just stands firm." After she left for school, I sat in the kitchen listening to the slow, steady ticking of Daniel's old clock, the heartbeat of my home. I thought of my son, his gentle smile, his steady eyes, when he once said, "Mom, I want to grow up to be like you." He was gone, but his daughter was carrying that strength forward, a new generation braver and kinder. Near noon, the phone rang. It was Elaine. "Evelyn, good news. The county just finalized your lifetime residency. The property's officially marked as non-transferable. And another thing, the bank is demanding Karina repay her loans in full. Karma seems to be moving faster than the law." I smiled softly. Maybe at last justice knows where to find its way. Later that day, Ruth brought me a small parcel. "From one of your neighbors," she said. Inside was an old photo album, the cover worn smooth. I turned the pages, pictures I'd never seen before: Daniel in his high school baseball uniform, grinning with his teammates. Me at the fence holding a cake after his victory. Under one photo was a note in shaky handwriting, "Mrs. Hart." I kept this memory from those days. "Thank you for raising such a good man. Mr. Bernard, your old neighbor." I closed the album, tears falling not of sadness, but of gratitude. That evening, Lily burst in, clutching a certificate. Grandma, everyone clapped. When I said, "My grandma never gives up," my teacher cried. I hugged her tight, laughing through my tears. "You know, sweetheart, it's you who gave Grandma the strength not to give up." Ruth entered then, handing me another envelope. "It's from Becky." My hands trembled as I opened it. The first line made me read it twice. "Mom, I owe you an apology. I believed Karina instead of you. But seeing the house alive again and Lily saying your name with pride, I understand now. You never fought for yourself. You fought for all of us." I sat for a long while, the letter resting in my lap. Perhaps this was real forgiveness, not what we give, but what others finally return. A few days later, Becky came by. No cold distance this time, just quiet warmth. She carried a basket of pale yellow tulips. Mom let me fix the fence. I only nodded. Some wounds heal best through deeds, not words. While Becky hammered the loose boards, Ruth smiled. See, Evelyn, the law protected your house, but love protected your heart. I laughed softly. You're right. A house is made of wood and nails, but a home is made of people. As the sun set, the backyard glowed amber. Lily arranged tulips in a vase, then asked thoughtfully, Grandma, what if I meet someone like Karina someday? I paused, then answered, Don't fear them. Just live in a way they can't pull you down the way I did. She nodded firmly. Then I'll live like you. That night I stepped outside. Spring wind brushed my face, carrying the scent of geraniums. Through the lit windows I saw Ruth and Becky laughing, Lily reading her poem aloud. Peace not because I won, but because I never gave up. I looked up at the sky and whispered, Daniel, you can rest now. Our home isn't a battleground anymore. It's a new beginning. Just as I turned back inside, Ruth handed me her phone. It's Karina. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was small, trembling. Evelyn, thank you for not pressing charges. I'm leaving the state. I need to start over. But I left something for you at the post office. You'll get it tomorrow. I stayed silent for a moment. Karina, if you truly want a new start, don't look back. That road's already finished. Her voice cracked. I know. And I hope Lily forgives me. Then the line went dead. The next morning I went to the post office. A small package waited, return address Lansing. Inside was Daniel's old necklace, the one Karina had kept all these years. Alongside it, a folded note. He truly loved you. I just wanted you to know that before I disappear. I gripped the chain tightly, tears blurring my sight. All the anger, grief, resentment, it melted away like mist. I whispered, thank you, Karina. Thank you for finally understanding. That afternoon, I hung the necklace beside Daniel's photo. Lily slipped her hand into mine. Grandma, it's all over now, right? I smiled. Not over, sweetheart, just the start of a new chapter. One filled with peace and gratitude. If you believe that forgiveness isn't weakness but strength, leave a comment with a E, because the peace you choose today might be the light that guides someone else through their storm tomorrow. Lily held my hand tightly, her eyes more serious than a child's should be. Grandma, she asked, how does our new chapter begin? I smiled. By rebuilding everything, sweetheart, one wall, one garden, one relationship at a time. That morning, Ruth arrived with a hand-drawn sketch. I think your house should have a corner just for Daniel, not for mourning, but for gratitude. I ran my fingers over the paper, my throat tightening. A place where memories can rest. I love that. The next few days passed in the sound of hammers, saws, and laughter. Ruth and Becky painted the fence while Lily arranged flower pots in the backyard. I stood on the porch watching them, feeling the house breathe again. That afternoon, Grace, my old neighbor who once avoided me when Karina spread her lies, came carrying a basket of pastries. She hesitated. Evelyn, I'm sorry I believed the rumors. I was afraid of being dragged into it, so I stayed quiet. But seeing you still standing today, I realized silence can be its own kind of betrayal. I smiled gently. Grace, we've all been afraid of the wrong things. What matters is that you came today. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she took my hand. Thank you for not turning your back on this neighborhood, even when it turned its back on you. Her words struck deep. The wounds Karina left hadn't just marked me. They'd touched everyone around us. When people witness injustice and say nothing, they shrink themselves too. Later, Lily came running into the garden with an old wooden box. "Grandma, I found a bunch of Dad's old photos." I opened it, dozens of pictures wrapped in wax paper, Daniel fixing the roof laughing with Becky, and one where he held baby Lily in his arms. My eyes stung. "We'll make a beautiful memorial," I told her softly. "Whenever you miss him, you can go there and tell him about your day." Lily nodded, smiling with quiet pride. A few days later, the memorial corner was ready, a wooden bench surrounded by Daniel's favorite flowers, geraniums, and roses. His smiling portrait rested on the seat, sunlight catching the glass. When it was done, I invited the neighbors for a small gathering, not a funeral, but a "thank you for standing back up" evening. More people came than I expected, even those who had once avoided me. They brought flowers, pies, and genuine warmth. Becky stood beside me holding my hand. "Mom," she whispered, "I think Daniel would be proud of you." I smiled. "No, dear. He'd be proud of us because we didn't let pain break us apart." As the sun dipped low, Lily climbed onto the bench and read her little poem aloud. The house once wet with rain and red paint now smells of pies and laughter again. Grandma says pain will dry someday if we plant flowers where wounds remain. The garden went still. I wasn't sure if the grown-ups understood every line, but I did. She had said what I never could, that every loss can bloom into something beautiful if you dare to begin again. That night, while Becky and I cleared the table, she said, "Mom, Karina wrote to me. She's in Detroit now working for a women's shelter, says she wants to make things right." I rested a hand on her shoulder. "If that's true, I'm glad. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you learn the joy of giving." Becky nodded. "Maybe you should talk to her, not to forgive, but to close the circle." I smiled faintly. "When my heart's ready, I will." That evening, Ruth stayed for dinner. 3 women, 3 generations sat around one table talking about small things, the soup being a bit too salty, the maple tree ready to change color, Lily wanting a cat. The light was warm, Lily's laughter filled the room, and for the first time, I felt life flowing through the house again. No more battles, just peace and the courage to keep it. Before bed, I opened the window. Moonlight fell over Daniel's picture, the bench, and the roses. "Thank you," I whispered, "for giving me another chance to love." The next morning, an envelope lay under the door. No name, just one line. "Thank you for not choosing hate." I knew the handwriting immediately, uneven but sincere. Karina didn't need to sign her name. I set the letter beside Daniel's photo and wrote back on a small note I chose freedom. "I hope you find yours too." Later that day, Ruth dropped by with a box of cookies. "Your house feels so calm now, Evelyn." I smiled. Peace is the greatest gift life ever returned to me after taking nearly everything. Just then, Lily ran in, tugging my sleeve. "Grandma, can we hang a sign out front? It'll say, 'Home of those who don't give up.'" "Can we?" I kissed her forehead. "Of course, sweetheart, because this house stands today for that very reason." That evening, as Ruth and I helped her hang the little wooden sign on the white fence, the sunset spilled gold across the letters, simple but shining. I stood there for a long time, feeling a strange, beautiful sense of wholeness. If you've ever had to fight to keep even a small piece of yourself and still chose to rise instead of hate, leave A in the comments. Because every resilient soul is a fragment of hope, and this story in some small way belongs to you too. The sunset still lingered over the small sign that read, "Home of those who don't give up." I stood there for a long time listening to the wind slip through the fence, carrying the scent of geraniums and damp earth. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood sometimes the greatest victory isn't reclaiming what was lost, but keeping your heart whole after everything. The next morning, Ruth arrived early, holding a newspaper. "Evelyn, you need to see this." On page 3 was an article titled 72-Year-Old Woman Wins Home Dispute, a Lesson in Resilience. I read each line stunned and deeply moved. It told my story from being cast out of my home after my son's funeral to standing up for my right to live there with courage and law on my side. At the end, the reporter wrote, "Mrs. Hart didn't just defend her house. She defended the meaning of the word home, something no cruelty can take away." Ruth chuckled. "You've become an icon." I smiled softly. I'm just a mother who refused to disappear. That afternoon, Becky arrived with Lily, who ran in beaming. "Grandma, my friends read about you in the paper. My teacher said she's putting your story on the school bulletin board." I laughed. Then I'd better start brushing my hair before I go out. The whole house erupted in laughter, the kind of natural, lively sound I hadn't heard in years. After dinner, Becky turned to me and said quietly, "Mom, I think I'll ask to transfer closer to here. I want Lily to spend more time with you." I froze, then reached for her hand. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes, I want her to grow up in a house filled with love, not fear." That simple sentence warmed my soul more than any fire could. After years of distance, my daughter and I sat together on the porch again, talking like nothing had ever come between us. That evening, Ruth sent a text. "Someone wants to meet you, a TV producer. They want to feature your story to inspire women who've faced injustice." I hesitated. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. Ruth replied instantly, "Evelyn, you don't need to be strong. Just honest. The truth already saved you. It'll save someone else too." 2 days later, a film crew came. They shot in the garden near Daniel's memorial bench. I told them everything: the thud of the suitcase thrown down the steps, the humiliation of being watched by silent neighbors, and the slow journey of reclaiming my dignity. When I spoke of Lily holding me inside the vandalized house, my voice broke. For a moment, the crew was completely silent. Then the director whispered, "Thank you. That's the moment that matters." After they left, Ruth and I sat in the garden. She smiled softly. "You know when you said kindness in the storm?" I saw one of the cameramen wiping his eyes. I chuckled. If my story helps someone stand up again, then every scar I carry is worth it. That night, the wind chimes. Daniel, once hung on the porch, swayed gently. I brewed tea, sat by the window, and opened an old drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope from an unfamiliar address. I hesitated, then tore it open. It was a short note I've started over somewhere far away. "Thank you for not making me your enemy forever. Karina." I folded it carefully and placed it beside Daniel's photo. "So it's truly over," I whispered. "No anger, no bitterness, just peace, deep and quiet." The next morning, golden light spilled through the windows, brightening the fresh white walls. Becky was cooking breakfast. Lily ran around in her tiny apron, and Ruth was making coffee. I stood there watching them, my heart overflowing. Everything I'd lost had come back in another form, not as possessions, but as love and gratitude. By noon, a neighbor's pickup truck pulled up. One by one, the people from Maplewood came through the gate carrying flower pots, picture frames, and small gifts. "We're here to help fix up your garden," they said. "We're calling it Maplewood Unity Day." I laughed, overwhelmed. "You don't have to." A man interrupted gently, "We want to." You reminded us that staying silent in the face of wrong is its own mistake. The afternoon filled with laughter. Children ran between fences while adults painted the gate and built a new rose trellis. Lily hugged me tightly. "Grandma, everyone loves you again," I smiled. Not love, sweetheart, understanding. When twilight came, Ruth raised a bottle of apple cider. To Evelyn Hart, she said, who proved that dignity never retires. Everyone laughed and cheered. I joined in, but inside I felt only calm contentment. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I walked into the garden. The wind lights glowed softly, casting a warm shimmer on Daniel's bench. I sat down and placed my hand on his photo. "You see, Daniel?" I whispered, "Our home has laughter again." Inside the house, I could hear Lily's giggle, Ruth's gentle goodnight, and the quiet rhythm of life finding its way back. I closed my eyes and let the breeze run through my hair. Maybe this was the real ending, not a victory, but peace. If you've ever felt that life has taken too much from you, believe this: it will return something, not always what you wanted, but what you truly needed. Leave I in the comments if you believe that faith and kindness can rebuild even the homes that once fell apart. The wooden bench beneath me was cool and smooth, the same one Daniel once built. Wind brushed through the garden, the chimes above me, whispering soft, familiar notes. The scent of geraniums mingled with damp soil, and for a moment I thought every storm ends somewhere, leaving behind a quiet patch of earth for those brave enough to stay. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window. Ruth was already brewing coffee while Becky and Lily sat in the living room, arranging old keepsakes for Lily's school project, A Day of Memories. She told me she wanted to share our story not as tragedy, but as a journey of justice and kindness. I looked at the two of them and felt my heart float light as the morning air. When Ruth brought me my cup, she smiled mysteriously. "You know they've put up a new sign at the end of the street," she said. "They renamed it Maplewood Hope Lane, the Street of Hope." I blinked. "You're joking." She shook her head. "No joke. The neighborhood council wanted to honor you. They said you reminded them that a community isn't built from bricks, but from the courage of those who live in it." I couldn't help but laugh, even as tears slipped down my cheeks. For years they'd called me stubborn, difficult, the old woman who wouldn't leave. And now? I was a symbol of hope. I never imagined such a thing. That afternoon, Becky went out, leaving Lily and me on the porch. She drew pictures while I opened letters. Among them was one envelope marked Shelter Wings, Detroit. Inside was a photograph of Karina's sleeves rolled up, helping a group of women repair a roof. On the back, in her handwriting, "Thank you for not leaving me in the dark. I've started over by helping others who've lost everything as I once did." I stared at the photo for a long time. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by the calm fatigue of someone finally living truthfully. I whispered to myself, she found her light after all. Later, Ruth arrived with a warm pie. To celebrate the new street, she said, grinning. We sat with tea as Lily practiced her speech for school. Nobody is perfect. Some people make mistakes, but they can choose to make things right. My grandma says justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance. Her house proves that even when walls were stained red and broken, they can shine again. She taught me that when we can't change others, we can still choose to be better ourselves. Neither Ruth nor I spoke for a long while. My heart felt lighter than it had in decades. Maybe everything I endured was so that one day Lily could stand and say those words. That evening, we walked to the end of the street. The sign was really there, Maplewood Hope Lane, gleaming new and golden. Below it, a smaller plaque read, "Dedicated to Evelyn Hart, Keeper of the Flame of Kindness." I stood staring until my vision blurred. Neighbors slowed their cars, waving, smiling. No pity this time, just quiet respect. Becky slipped an arm around my shoulders. "Mom, I'm proud of you." I smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart. I just learned not to give up. It's all of you who gave me the strength to make it here." That night, I opened my journal, the one that had followed me through every heartbreak and victory. I wrote, "I lost my son, my name, and my faith in people. But when I thought I had nothing left, life gave me back what mattered most, the chance to live truthfully, to love fully, and to forgive freely." Just as I closed the notebook, Lily's voice echoed from the kitchen, "Grandma, the cookies are ready." The house filled with the scent of butter and cinnamon and laughter. Ruth snapped a picture of us at the table, 3 generations bathed in golden light, and sent it to me with the caption, "The Hart family proof that healing is possible." Later, I stepped out to the porch. The moon hung full and gentle, spilling silver across the garden. "Daniel," I whispered, "can you see us now?" I kept the house, but more than that, I kept our family's soul. The wind chimes swayed, answering with a soft metallic sigh. Maybe somewhere beyond the stars he was listening. I lingered a moment longer, then turned back inside. Lily was asleep on the couch, Becky tucking her in. The sight filled me with gratitude deeper than words. Quietly, I whispered to the night, "Thank you, life, for letting me grow old this way. No bitterness, no regret, only peace." And I realized then the justice I'd searched for wasn't written in court papers. It was here in this breath, in this house rebuilt by kindness. Everything broken can be made whole again if we rebuild it with love. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. Leave in the comments if you believe that even after great loss, there's always room for hope and new beginnings. And so, the story of Evelyn Hart comes to a close, not with tears nor with anger, but with the quiet light of peace. Once a mother cast out by her own daughter-in-law, stripped of dignity and trust, she rose again armed with the law, unwavering resolve, and a heart full of grace to prove that justice may come late, but it always comes to those who refuse to give up. The house on Maplewood wasn't just repainted, it was reborn through love, forgiveness, and compassion. From pain, Evelyn found strength. From loss, she rediscovered the meaning of home. And for us, the listeners, her journey reminds us that revenge doesn't make us stronger, only forgiveness can set us truly free. If you've ever carried wounds like Evelyn's, believe this, every hardship leads you back to yourself. Because when the heart stays steadfast, no one can take your dignity away. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this moving story. If you believe that kindness and justice still exist in this world, please subscribe, and share this video so together we can spread the strength of love and faith. See you in the next story, where once again we'll find light shining through the pain.